Hi, everybody. We're back with the story of Hannah from First Samuel. And there's a couple of women here that we're going to be studying in First Samuel. Remember to review a little bit that for the book of First Samuel is the story of Samuel's life, and he was one of the greatest prophets and came at the time of the end of the Judges, just before the Israelites wanted a king, and so Herod became their first king at the end of, or more towards the middle of Samuel's life. And then eventually towards the end of Samuel's life, then he anoints David and, so on. So he was a very influential character. But there's a woman behind the scenes, and that is Samuel's mother, Hannah. And as we remember, she was married to Elkanah, and he had two wives, and Peninnah, his other wife, she had lots of children. And Hannah didn't have any children. She wasn't blessed with any children for quite a while in their marriage. And Elkanah didn't really seem to care. He really loved Hannah. But that kind of made Peninnah even madder, and so she taunted her and teased her. I decided to look this story up in a different version, in the Message version, because it's more modern language, and I could hear what they had to say about it. So here's how the end of her, or not the end of her story, but the middle of her story is told. Every year, Elkanah went up from his hometown to Shiloh to worship and offer a sacrifice to God of the angel armies. Eli and his two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, served as the priests of God there. When Elkanah sacrificed, he passed helpings from the sacrificial meat around to his wife Peninnah and to her children. But he always gave an especially generous helping to Hannah, because he loved her so much, and because God had not given her any children. But her rival wife taunted her cruelly, rubbing it in and never letting her forget that God had not given her any children. This went on year after year. Every time she went to the sanctuary of God, she could expect to be taunted. Hannah was reduced to tears and had no appetite. She was so upset she didn't even want to eat this meat that her husband gave her. Her husband Elkanah said, "Oh, Hannah, why are you crying? Why aren't you eating? And why are you so upset? Am I not worth more to you than 10 sons?" Now, this is the part where we ended last time, so let's start with what the Message, more modern translation says in the next verse. So Hannah ate. Then she pulled herself together and slipped away quietly and entered the sanctuary. See, I like that translation. It makes me think like, okay, I'll go ahead and eat, and then as soon as I eat something, you just get up and go off to pray by yourself. That's kind of what Hannah did. So if I switch over now to my regular, I'm going to switch over to the New International Version. In that one, it says, once they finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. This is 1 Samuel verse 10 or 9. Now Eli the priest was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. Now remember earlier in this version they said the priests were Hophni and Phinehas, and they're the sons of Eli. So Eli must have been another priest that was there, the father of these two that were serving, who were evil, really. But Eli, he still, does his priestly duties here. So Eli the priest was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. So Hannah here makes a vow. She vows to the Lord that if he gives her a son, that she will dedicate that son back to the Lord for his service. And remember, we go all the way back to the beginning when we talked about her husband Elkanah being of the house of Levi. So he is actually a Levite. And so Hannah knows that her son will also be in a priestly line because he will be a Nazarite or a, a priest, I mean, from Levites. Now, the vow that she makes is what we call a Nazarite vow. And a Nazarite vow is a vow that was made at that time. And the thing is, that person promised they would not drink wine or anything made from grapes, and they would not cut their hair, and they would not go near dead people. And there's reasons really for that. This person vowed to live apart from society and make a vow of abstinence, you know. And in that sense, they were dedicated to the Lord. I'm looking up something that I had. Samson would have been an example of someone who had vowed the Nazarite vow because he wasn't supposed to cut his hair, and his only trouble came when he allowed his hair to be cut. There's a couple of others, I guess, mentioned in the Bible. Actually, we often think that perhaps John the Baptist, who avoided drinking alcohol and was, kind of apart from everyone, let his hair grow, and also that maybe that was another Nazarite vow. But the thing is, the Nazarites just followed those three rules. They refrained from drinking alcohol. They had to avoid near or touching anything that was dead, including their family, and they would not cut their hair. Now, some people were Nazarites their whole life. Other people would be Nazarites for a period of time, like, say, a month, let's say. And for a month they would do this and keep themselves away from people, let their hair grow, not drink any alcohol. And it was a way of cleansing themselves and becoming closer to God. There are a couple instances, though, where these vows were made by mothers before the actual birth of the child, and this is one of them. So I looked up why they would follow these extra Nazarite rules, It basically is just so that they could dedicate themselves to the service of God, at least for a period of time. Kind of like a monk might do, So actually, we give up something sometimes for Lent, and that's a kind of a vow also, where people do that so that they can become closer to the Lord, that they can use that time for spirituality. And that's what Hannah is saying here. She's saying, hey, I am going to promise you that if you give me a son, I'm not just going to keep him at home to help out Elkanah with the farm, I am going to, from the day of his birth, he will be yours. He will be yours. That must have taken an amazing amount of faith. But how about desperation too, right? I mean, she was desperate. And she has faith, though. Even throughout all the teasing and the many years and all this time that has passed and no children, she still believes that if God would favor her, that she could have a child. So she isn't out of faith yet. And that's why she goes to the temple and starts to pray. So in my New Living Translation, it says that she was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord. O Lord of heaven's armies, if you will look on my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, I will give him back to you. He will be yours for his entire lifetime. And as a sign that he's been dedicated to the Lord, his hair will never be cut. So it's definitely a Nazarite vow that she is making, and it's a lifetime Nazarite vow, not just a Nazarite vow for the first year of his life or the first couple years of his life. No, it was definitely a lifetime thing. So this is the Message version. Says Hannah prayed to God and cried inconsolably. So this is deep anguish, deep anguish. And the message version goes on to say, it so happened that as she continued in prayer before God, Eli was watching her closely, and Hannah was praying in her heart silently. Her lips moved, but no sound was heard. Eli jumped to the conclusion that she was drunk. He approached her and said, "You're drunk. How long do you plan to keep this up? Sober up, woman." I love the message. Puts it right. So it's typical of what we would say, Sober up, woman. Here in the New Living Translation, it says, seeing her lips moving but hearing no sound, he thought she had been drinking. "Must you come here drunk?" he said. "Throw away your wine." So he's being, he's disciplining her, reproaching her, let's say. Reminds me of something that happened to me as a young person. My mother always took me to church. My mother and father both went to church and brought us to church. All the kids, in a line in the pew, and my mother would be watching us, with the hawk eye, and if we weren't doing something right, she'd reprimand us. So the one time we were actually standing, and the minister was praying, and I did not fold my hands. I had my hands kind of on the bench in front of me, and I was turned a little bit away from my mother, and I did have my eyes closed. But I don't know what she thought I was doing, but she thought I was fooling around. And all of a sudden, I got the elbow. "Fold your hands," she says to me. Well, the thing is, we don't have to have our hands folded in order to be praying, do we? My mother was really trying to just encourage me to follow along. I kidded her about it later, but in reality, in my head, I was praying. I sincerely was praying. Lots of other times I wasn't paying attention, and she could have given me the elbow and been justified. But this time, I was actually praying, and she didn't know it. Okay, and that's kind of what Eli jumped to the conclusion. He said, her lips are moving, she's rah, 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 and he thought, this lady's drunk. Okay. It really is a good lesson for all of us. Don't jump to conclusions, people. We never know what's really going on, do we, in someone's head or in their heart. Only God knows. Only God knows. I mean, we try to judge from the actions that we see, but as human beings, we cannot read someone's heart. Very often, we have it wrong. I've had a lot of friends that when I first met them, I thought they were snobs. I thought they were full of themselves. And it ended up they were shy, or reserved. Or they all felt awkward, We read things sometimes, and we read things in people's actions, and it's always good to go to the Lord and ask for his discernment in that. I think, ask God to open up your eyes to what he wants you to see. There are people that you do need to stay away from that are not the right kind of people, or that will hurt us if we're not careful. But then there's some that we judge harshly. And in this case, Eli judged Hannah. He judged her from the fact that he saw her there in the temple, and he thought she was drunk. So here's how she responded. "Oh, no, sir," she replied. This is out of my Bible, the NLT Bible. I know I'm switching back and forth for 3 different versions. So. "Oh, no, sir," she replied. "I have not been drinking wine or anything stronger, but I am very discouraged, and I was pouring out my heart to the Lord. Don't think I'm a wicked woman, for I have been praying out of great anguish and sorrow." She's very honest with him, isn't she? She could have just gotten mad and gone away. She could have gotten in an argument with him. She could have maybe just turned away and gone off by herself, got out of church. Some people do that. Nobody understands me here, so I'm going to go by myself. Instead of that, she just opens up her heart to Eli. She says, I'm upset, and I'm trying to pray here because I got to go to God. I'm in anguish. I'm in sorrow. I'm hurting. I like how she opens up to him. And Eli I think he's taken aback by her reaction. I really do, because this is how he responds. He says, "In that case," Eli says, "go in peace. May the God of Israel grant the request that you have asked of him." Wow, he changes his tune really fast, doesn't he? He changes his tune super fast. I want to read what the Message says. The Message says, Hannah says to him, I haven't been drinking not a drop of wine or beer. The only thing I've been pouring out is my heart, pouring it out to God. Don't for a minute think I'm a bad woman. It's because I'm so desperately unhappy and in such pain that I've stayed here for so long. And Eli answered her, Go in peace, and may the God of Israel give you what you've asked him. I think it's Eli had stepped back and let his sons become the major players in the temple. And in a lot of ways, that was a bad move, as shows later on in this story. But that doesn't mean Eli has given up his priestly duties. And one of his priestly duties would be to bless people. And he is saying, if you're sincere and you're not drunk and you have anguish, I'm going to give you a blessing. So it's not just that he says, oh, good job. No, this would have been almost like a formal blessing, I think, from the way I read it anyway. Go in peace. And it's like he's praying over her. May the God of Israel grant the request you have asked of him. Oh, thank you, sir, she exclaimed. Then she went back and began to eat again, and she was no longer sad. This is why I think she knew it was a powerful priestly blessing that he had given her, because immediately she feels different. She goes back, and a woman who didn't have an appetite, now she's going to eat something. And she's not crying anymore. She's not crying out to God. She was no longer sad. That's what it says, no longer sad. When we give something to the Lord because we're upset about it, or we feel out of control, or something is a problem for us. I have had this experience so many times. I pray about it and I give it to the Lord, and then I take it back. And then I pray about it and give it to the Lord, and then I kind of take it back. I can't worry about it again, Think about it some more, pray about it some more. This was an all or nothing thing. I mean, she had been praying for many, many years. Let's face it. She had been probably praying many times. But this time was different. This time, she felt the presence of the Lord in that blessing that Eli gave her. Go in peace. May the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. If we allow our hearts to be open when we're praying, we also can feel that peace that passes understanding. Nothing's changed, but suddenly we know that everything's going to work out the way God wants it to be, and that is the best way for all of us. It's difficult to do, it's difficult to sense, it's difficult to open yourself to that, but when you do, you have this feeling of genuine peace come over you. And I think that's what Hannah had here, because she went back, she started eating, she was no longer sad. So we'll see what happens then. We'll see how God fulfills this wonderful, wonderful blessing that Eli the priest has given to Hannah. Until then, may the peace of the Lord be with you. Have a good day.